What's up team, it is now day 7 of designing every single day, and if you ever wanted to make a graphic for your clothing brand using Procreate, look no further. I have a full detailed process on how to make this exact design for your clothing brand, so watch this full video. What's up team, today we're going to be designing on Procreate, so make sure your dimensions are this for the canvas, so 3000 on the top and then 3300 for the length, and that's going to be perfectly fine for most t-shirts. DPI is going to be set to 300 as always, especially if you're going to print, and all you have to do is press create. We're going to set our color brush to a bright red, and for this tutorial we're going to be using the studio pen, and we're going to set the stabilization all the way off and make it a small size because we're going to be sketching. If you're sketching like a characterized face, just start off with 2 round or oval shapes because these are going to dictate your facial features, and you'll see later on what I mean by this. Go ahead and add a new layer in, and on this layer you want to turn the opacity down of the original one, and this one is where you're going to start sketching the actual facial features and just getting a general overview of what the head you want. So basically what I had in mind was vintage college mascot designs in reference of like those Cartoon Network early graphics, and that's what I wanted to come up with, this sort of devil, and you know, play on that. So again, using the shapes that we made to begin with, I'm creating the main head, and then I'm creating the bottom like he's having a big grin on his face or a big smile. And that's the kind of effect that I wanted to go with, a very exaggerated looking figure. Because we're freehanding this drawing slash design, I'm not using any drawing assist, and I'm literally just going over a reference that I have in front of me and trying to draw a character based on that. For me personally, I wanted to play on this character being a little bit more street or a bit of more on the bad side. So I went ahead and gave him a rude finger and also just made this chain, and I'm going to put the brand name in there, so Ground Vintage, and I'm just going to bring everything together. For the actual chain part of the graphic, I went ahead and just used some generic font to give myself a stencil to draw around. And once I had this stencil, I basically just went to town with on the layer that we're sketching on and just kind of traced around loosely, made it like a bubble style graphic. So once I had my sketch finalized, I went back into the studio pen and I turned up the stabilization a bit. You can have a bit more. I would say around 30 to 40% is perfect. And then I went ahead and made a new layer and turned down my sketch layer. This is where we're going to be doing our inking. Don't forget to bring up the size of your brush all the way up because you want a thicker brush sort of look, and just go to town, kind of tracing and finalizing your artwork. Again, in real time, that little sketch section took about 30 to 40 minutes, and inking is a little bit less time, but this is where you're finalizing your actual detail, so don't rush this step at all. Now, me personally, I'm using the actual sketch layer as just a shell for what my graphic is going to look like. So if I'm making a beanie on this section here, the actual design, I'm trying to make it a little bit more rough than the sketch in itself because I wanted to imitate clothing. Now for the actual chain, I went ahead and used the sketch that I made of the rough text and kind of just bubbled around that and made the actual text a bit more dramatic. Some of the words you can't really read, or some of the letters, I mean, not the words, but that's the whole point when it comes to these cartoon or, you know, very stylized graphics. You kind of just come up with your own style and try to, you know, envision it and make it come to life. And I'm just going to go ahead and bubble around. So it's one of those like connected chains. It's not like a pendant because it was just a lot easier to go that route with the sketch that I had envisioned. And that's why sketching is very important because again, that becomes the shell for your graphic. Lastly, all that was left was just to add a bit of detail. So like the bandages on his face, I wanted to make it look like the devil was beat up because there's a cross in his head. And I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. I think I was just playing on this kind of sacrilegious sort of design. When it comes to streetwear brands, anything is kind of on the tables and you just make whatever you want. Now, once you're happy with that, you can go ahead and just delete your sketch layer or keep it, whatever you want. I like to delete them because I don't really need them anymore. Now, before you start coloring, make sure you make a duplicate of your layer, and that's the layer you're going to color in. So go to town and color your graphic how you see fit. After you have your artwork colored and you have all the little holes filled, it is now time to add things like details and highlights. The first thing I'm going to add is a new layer. And from this new layer, I'm going to go ahead and set the color to a different style of gold to add highlights to my chain. And again, this is all optional, but it allows your graphic to be a little bit more realistic. I mean, we're not going for the realism look, but more detail is always better when it comes to drawings. It just fills the empty spaces and makes the design look a bit more complete. Now, to make this, I guess, highlight look a bit more realistic, go into your actual effects panel and then go to Gaussian blur and then just add a bit of a blur. I like to stay between 2 and 5 because I feel like that is the best. Anything more or anything less becomes too much or unnoticeable. Don't forget to make another duplicate of your original artwork and add that to the very top because everything underneath that is going to be whatever you want. Next, add a layer above your color layer, and this is where we're going to add in our effects, which means we're going to go ahead and add in shadows to the full graphic, shadows and highlights. Clip this layer that's above your color layer onto your color layer and then just go to town adding in shadows where you think shadows should be. For me, the light is coming from where his ear is turned, and that's where we're blasting all the light. So I'm going ahead and adding shadows from there. Turn down the opacity a bit so you can see what you're actually working on. Now, again, shading is a hit or miss, and it's very dependent on your graphic. There is rules to follow, but I'm not a traditional artist. I don't care too much. So I'm just going ahead and making shadows wherever I see fit. But obviously, if this was like a realism or if you wanted the drawing to be a bit better, there's a lot more things you need to take into account. Once you're happy with your shading, I want you to actually go onto the effects again and just add a Gaussian blur. And once you add that Gaussian blur, you can kind of see the graphics start to come to life and kind of look like a 3D extrusion via Photoshop. So that's the look we're kind of going for. I want you to add a new layer, but this time in white. And for this layer, you're going to do the exact same steps. So go over and find the highlights. So that's usually just the direct opposite of where the shadows are. And then once you're happy with that, add the Gaussian blur and you should have your highlights and shadows complete for your graphic. Again, if you missed that step, go to your layer and go up to the little wand and press Gaussian blur and then just put it to 2 to 5 and then you're complete. Next, I'll go ahead and add some text, ground vintage, and I'll use this font for the design as it matches the whole vintage aesthetic. Later on, I'll go ahead and change this, but yes, you can go ahead and add kerning and adjust your sizing, tracking, etc. in Procreate, which is pretty cool, but I feel like it's still lacking some key features, which kind of slow down your process, especially when it comes to warping and adjusting type. For example, the only way you can achieve an arc in this program is by doing it manually, as opposed to things like Photoshop and Illustrator, which have pre-built arcs in there that don't completely distort your font. Because the one thing, once you've warped your font, you're kind of wrecking the resolution because you're stretching out an image. And I'll walk you through exactly how to make or add text. Just go up to that little spanner and press add text and just select your font. And basically you can change it to whatever you want really. And that's how you add text within Procreate. I wanted to make a quick logo within the program, and all I did was add in a new layer. I selected my color from a brush, which is black, and I'm using a studio pen, and I put the stabilization all the way up, and I just went to town and started freehanding a, I guess, G, because the brand is ground vintage. So I went ahead and just went with that, and then I just made a V to kind of add on to that. After that, I went ahead and added a new layer, grabbed my brush again, and then I made a circle. You hold down and then Procreate will make it a perfect circle for you. And basically I want to create one of those emblem logos. Important step, always make a duplicate of the layer you're about to fill in, especially when it comes to logos and stuff, because you want to always go back or make adjustments, and you can't do that with a colored in layer. It just gets too messy. I went ahead and made a manual offset, so I made a duplicate of our circle, made this one a bit bigger, and tried my best to center it, but I wasn't really too focused on making this perfect, as adding a bit of, offset to the left or right gives the, I guess, logo a bit more character. The next step was I just flattened the two layers, so I merged them down and it made one layer, made a duplicate, and I started coloring the layer underneath. For the color, I basically wanted to match the actual graphic without making it a bit too corny, so I just went ahead and took some accent colors like the green from the cross and just yellow from the chain and just brought it all together. Once I was happy, I basically just started grouping everything and making sure everything was all stuck together. So the logo is one group, the main design is one group, and the fonts are behind and in front. Just so we have a bit more organization, and I made a duplicate of that group and flattened the one that I was going to add the final details on. The final details are just adding the same shadow and highlights that we did for the face, but this time just on the actual GV. So again, start off with a new layer and then create a clipping mask and then go in with a black brush. The Studio Pen is more than capable of this, and then add your shadows in where you see fit. Once you're happy with that, go ahead and add your highlights, or if you're just happy with the shadows, go ahead and just go up to a little magic wand and add in your Gaussian blur effect. Next, we'll start working on our actual typography. So the first thing I did was just color in the type because it is a rasterized image. You can go ahead and color in the fill shapes because it works exactly as any other shape. And then next, I wanted a way to basically mash all my text together without having it blur. So I went ahead and highlighted each individual letter, and then I went ahead and copied and then pasted onto a new layer. And I did this for every single letter. Once this was set up, I went ahead and arranged the letters in a more scrunched together fashion to just have a more unique graphic. I started off by using the freehand selection tool, and then going and highlighting or swiping down and pressing copy. So if you swipe down on your whole tablet or iPad, it will give up the options for copy, and then making a new layer on top. And then in that layer, I'm pasting the actual letter, and then yeah, just repeat. Once I have all my letters duplicated, I can go ahead and just move them around freely without having to worry about them mushing together and becoming one object. And then from here, I just go ahead and group everything. I wanted my text still editable in case I want to go back and move around the font. So instead of flattening the group, I went ahead and just warped the whole group. So I went into the transform section, went into the warp at the very end, and then I just went to town, rounding the actual graphic to fit around our main focused character. And the next thing to address was this ugly as ground vintage font. So I went ahead and grabbed the streak brush, turned the stabilization all the way off, added a new layer on top, and I went ahead and freehanded a new ground sort of font. From here, I added a new layer on top of that, which then I went in with the Studio Pen and just traced around it to make it match the hand-drawn image that we have originally. Again, when it comes to graphics, it's not really looking at it like a traditional poster. So things don't have to be readable as long as people know it's your brand. The last thing you want to do is group everything together. And then once you're happy with that, make a duplicate in case you make any mistakes. And then flatten the group that you've duplicated so you have your final graphic. Next, we'll go ahead and add a texture. I just got this one from Texture Labs, and I'm just going to drop it on top of our graphic. And to get that vintage comic book magazine look, set the blend mode to hard light. Next, we're going to go ahead and import another texture. This one's going to be our grunge texture. And I'm going to walk you guys through exactly how to do that sort of grunge ripped graphic in this program. The first thing you want to do is basically select your actual image. And to work smarter, not harder, select the white part of your image and then just press invert selection. And that's going to select the black part of your image. And then head over back to your graphic once it's flattened, and then go in with an eraser and remove the sections you want on top of your graphic. And again, this is why we duplicated our graphic in case we need to go back. So once you get this, for me personally, I went ahead and used one of the texture brushes, but I strongly recommend that you use just a studio brush on maxed sizing because that works better. Lastly, I went ahead and added another texture on top, just this black film texture again from Texture Labs, created a clipping mask, And then I went through the different settings to see which one looked the best, because I wanted some color back into the graphic. But again, I want that sort of scanned in vintage magazine or comic book look. And I thought that overlay worked the best for this once I put the clipping mask on. Lastly, I went over to my sketchbook with all my mockups that I've made for Procreate. I don't know if I'm going to drop this or not. I'm not really happy with it, but I got this zip up hoodie. I went ahead and just copied it from here and then pasted that into the actual artboard that we've made with our graphic and just put the design onto the hoodie. Now, if you guys want me to do a tutorial on how to make a realistic mock-up in Procreate, just let me know and I'll do that for the next Procreate video that I do. But again, it's the exact same thing as when you're doing the graphic, just adding shadows and highlights. And I went ahead and used the same texture we use on the graphic on the actual hoodie to give it a more realistic look. And you can just see that here with the layers. And once that was done and I added my final Gaussian blur, our design was complete. I hope you guys enjoy this video. I'll see you guys in the next one tomorrow. Peace. So I made this design in Procreate. Hey, my name is Wilson. It is now day 7 of designing every single day. I don't really like Procreate, and a lot of people love Procreate. I've never been one to like it, especially when you're designing clothes. It's very slow. But if you want to watch exactly how I made this or want to learn, comment 30 days and I'll send you the link. So make sure you click my profile. It's going to be the same. So make sure you click my profile. It's going to be the first video you see for the next 24 hours.